Now imagine you're the lord of Ludlow Castle.
You've invited everyone who matters to a feast.
How do you impress them?
Towering pie.
An incredible sugar sculpture.
Rare spices from across the world?
Join us for a special live edition of A is for Apple as we uncover the foods, feasts and fascinating history of castle dining.
From the kitchens to the Great Hall.
Discover what it really took to feed a castle.
We'll explore the ingredients, the spectacle, the logistics and the people behind some of history's most unforgettable feasts.
Join us at Ludlow Food Festival on Friday the 11th of September for A is for Apple Live, C is for Castle. We can't wait to see you there. Welcome back to the Comfortably Hungry podcast for part 2 of my deep dive into the history of macaroni and cheese with culinary historian Karima Moyer-Nocchi, author of The Epic History of Mac and Cheese, a fantastic book if ever there was one. Last week we discussed the early heritage of this dish, but today we're going to focus on how and why it jumped across the pond to the US and continued to develop on both sides of the Atlantic to become the culinary icon we know and love today. Don't forget that the theme for next season of Comfortably Hungry is fat, so do email your suggestions for any topics you'd like me to cover to comfortablyhungry@gmail.com. But now let's get stuck into our second helpings of some delicious mac and cheese. Now, you've taught, obviously, at this time, most European countries, but notably Britain is expanding its colonial interests. And you talk about colonial FOMO in the book. So how did Britain's cultural influence over in the American colonies shape their enthusiasm for the dish?
This is the distinction, a political distinction, whatever the colonists' loyalties may have been politically, it really didn't matter. Just as in England, they have the French or whatever, but we want to eat this other thing here. It's got meaning. So they remain deeply tied to Britain culturally, and then Britain was very much looking to France. So you've got that kind of dynamic going on. English standards of taste and behavior and refinement were transmitted across it, and not forcibly. I mean, they were English, or at least culturally English, and or French. So they're transmitted across the Atlantic through cookbooks, household manuals, conduct manuals, books of etiquette. They told people what to eat, how to prepare the food, how to serve it, and how to act while they were at the table and dining. So in colonial society, everyone was watching everyone else, and these social missteps, including what you were preparing, they didn't go unnoticed or unpunished. So a family you could lose your social standing by just making the wrong move. Now, macaroni and cheese was a fashionable dish. It wasn't just tasty, even though it was. Taste at this kind of level of society is learned and acquired. But macaroni and cheese is offering the best of both worlds, because enjoying it really didn't require donning the emperor's new clothes. You didn't have to really force it down. It was an elite dish, and it carried meaning. So serving it expressed culinary sophistication and social knowledge. It signaled that you were cosmopolitan, that you were conversant with the latest culinary fashions. So what made macaroni and cheese especially successful and enduring was its remarkable flexibility. Macaroni didn't necessarily have to be imported from Italy, or it didn't have to be the extruded kind, because of that umbrella term was still very much active. you could make it by hand and it would still be understood as macaroni. You were part of this elite, in the know kind of group. And the same was true with cheese. The English cooks were increasingly substituting with Cheshire or Gloucester, whatever. Something was less expensive and less tedious to acquire. But without the feeling that you were compromising the dish. In fact, you were to certain tastes, you were improving it. And so these weren't seen as cheap substitutions, but perfectly acceptable innovations. And that adaptability of the dish, the adaptability of the ingredients, allowed it to retain its fashionable identity and at the same time adapt to changing tastes and availability and whatever your tastes were. It kind of differing levels of wealth. So you didn't have to be the super wealthy, but this is still an elite dish. It's an aspirational dish. And I find, as historians and watching how the notion of authenticity is also fluid. So our notion of authenticity is going to kind of change in accordance with what we want. And in fact, what happens to the dish is that it's often referred to then as macaroni à l'italienne. So oddly, in French, about the Italian dish, with then an English recipe that follows.
So I was going to say, at this point, I'm assuming bears very little resemblance to what would have been served in Italy, or is that not the case?
Well, the creaminess. And so, let's consider, for example, 1767, Elizabeth Raffald, the English housekeeper. She's got that butterball with the flour and cream. The whole thing is just becoming creamier. And that is something that is going to distance itself from Italy. What goes around comes around, it gets mixed up, and so there you go.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about culinary history, isn't it? Absolutely. So out of Britain came the extraordinary phenomenon of macaroni fashion, which I do love. I love it when food and fashion collide. So what was it, and what did it have to do with the dish?
Macaroni fashion. I love this one. So I wanted to say that it had anything happened suddenly. The English had long been fascinated with Italy. What began as an Italophilia blossomed into Italomania really during the Elizabethan period. There was just a major fixation. So by the 18th century, that fascination became bound up with the food called macaroni. So it was already very much about fashion in the Elizabethan period. Think about Malvolio, for example.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So it gets mixed up with fashion. Now let's start in with the Grand Tour. When wealthy British families, again, all of that movement and mobility and everything, wealthy British families are sending their sons to Italy and the continent to absorb classical culture. In reality, kids being kids, there was some more partying than scholarship and playing cards and all of that, and much more interest in clothes and fashion and rubbing elbows with whoever. And they returned to England then so full of themselves. They had done their tour of duty in the culture with their exaggerated dress and their affected manners. And so many of their contemporaries just found that irritating. It was really irritating, and they wanted to be irritating. The disruption is what made it so alluring. And so these young men formed what was called the Macaroni Club. It was very exclusive, supposed to just be these young men who had returned and done the Grand Tour. And they became simply known as the Macaronis. Okay, you were a macaroni. By the 1770s, then, the movement was really at its peak, and calling someone a macaroni had immediately conjured up a recognizable type. So I like to liken this to the word hippie. If you say hippie, it's a recognizable type, even 60 years on. No one needs to explain it. The same thing was going on with the word macaroni. Here again, macaroni is acquiring an entirely new meaning. Okay. It's no longer referring to just a food, but it's a trendy, cosmopolitan kind of identity. What began then as this small elite circle broadened out into a youth movement that the impact of which cannot be overstated. Much more so than the hippie movement, which we all already know what that is. You no longer needed to go to Italy. It was just something people aspired to. Now, what's going to happen is the visibility of that movement increases the desirability of being part of it, and the desirability of the food stuff and the dish macaroni, which in turn makes it the food more available itself. And this is another example of meaning driving the history of macaroni and cheese. And the dish doesn't simply endure because people liked eating it, but because it was socially, culturally significant. It meant something if you ate it. And this significance is going to cross over the Atlantic through newspapers and satirical prints and songs, theater in particular, entertainment, and advertisements also for macaroni fashion. We can see that 1769, there was an advertisement for macaroni apparel already in Rhine's Virginia Gazette.
So what is macaroni apparel then? I know what macaroni is as a food stuff. What is a macaroni apparel?
So it's just extremely elegant clothing, exaggerated wigs that these lampooned cartoons often show you've got a servant walking behind the macaroni figure, holding on to the rest of the wig because it's so exaggerated. The little teeny tiny hat at the top, and the shoes that are very exaggerated. The walking cane. It's very much the dandy, the restoration dandy. The hanky that's held just so, and all of that. So that's macaroni fashion. So in Rhine's Gazette, they specifically say macaroni waistcoats that are going to be of a particular elegance.
Wow. Okay. So is that where the reference in the song, Yankee Doodle, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni? Is that where that comes? That's alluding to that fashion, is it?
Yes, I didn't mention it because I didn't know how exclusively American that might be. But that's certainly something. And we all learned that.
Well, I assume that's a song that we used to sing as a jibe at the Americans.
So it's coming out around 1755. So that, considering how early that is and how long this macaroni movement went on.
Wow, yeah.
1755, it was a ditty invented to kind of make fun of the Americans, the country yokels who, try as they might, certainly weren't up to keeping up with fashions. In fact, they thought that, they could get on their pony and stick a feather in their head and they could actually think that they're following the macaroni fashion, but that's just simply not possible, is it?
Well, yeah, at the end they had the last laugh at the end of the day, let's face it.
Right. So that gets turned around and becomes an anthem for the American Revolution. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk just briefly about Thomas Jefferson and his chef James Hemings. What influence did they have on popularizing the dish in the US?
Probably the greatest gastronomist, because there's also Catherine de Medici in there and other gastronomists in the midst of this. But for the Americans, the greatest gastromyth is that Thomas Jefferson, and later the story was transferred on to James Hemings, one of them was responsible for introducing, popularizing, and spreading this dish in the United States. And you'll find versions of this everywhere in the internet. I'm constantly battling it off. Newspaper articles, museum websites. Now we're talking about high level things here. Library of Congress. Just a few days ago in the New York Times, there was another thing about this gastromyth. It would have taken 2 minutes for them to do a tiny bit of research.
They should have read your book.
There you go. I've already kind of established that it was already there. So what happens is that once people realize that Jefferson didn't actually cook anything, that agency was then transferred over wholesale to James Hemings, who was Jefferson's enslaved chef. I don't know that everyone knows that. So Hemings had accompanied Jefferson to Paris. He had previously been Jefferson's valet, an enslaved person. And they went to Paris, where Hemings was trained in French cookery. They stayed for 6 years, and then they returned to the United States. This is the beginning of then that myth. They're coming back from France, and then macaroni and cheese. It's a wonderful, very tidy story. It's that one dish, one moment, one hero kind of structure. And these are exactly the kinds of stories that are enjoyable to latch onto. They're easy, but they don't reflect how food history actually works. And macaroni was already available in the colonies. There were cookbooks, and the food stuff was also there. I've traced back shipments of macaroni, the food. So there's no question that Jefferson adored this dish. This is well documented. He ordered tons of it. But notably also, most of that ordering is being done after James Hemings had already committed suicide. Well, the phenomenon that we have going on here is that he may, in the wave of macaroni, he may well have influenced others to embrace the dish in the same kind of way that Jacqueline Kennedy was influencing fashion without inventing it. Beyond that, there's just simply no evidence. What we can say with confidence is that they were part of a wave. Thomas Jefferson was very important. He loved having people over for dinner. He had state dinners. Then there's the macaroni pie story, which was 1802, supposedly made by James Hemings, who was already dead. And this macaroni pie story was supposed to be the moment in which macaroni and cheese went viral. Jefferson served it at a state dinner. But the only mention of that pie by a Reverend Massenet Cutler, he hated it. He thought it was disgusting, and wrote about how really awful it was. And so that myth has to get toned down.
Going back to the pie, and I think we may talk more about pies, but did they eat the crust as well? I know at this point we were eating pie crust.
At this point, crust was right. Crust was being eaten.
So you were eating carb on carb, basically. You would literally eat the pastry and the filling, the macaroni filling. It wasn't just being used as an elaborate serving vessel for
right. And in some of it was very elaborate. So you've got Carême in the midst of this, who had these very architectural kinds of pies. But Menon has a gorgeous pie that I have the photograph in mind. It's this huge vol au vent that I just nerve-wracking thinking of making it because it's one of those things that you're sweating the entire time that you're making it, hoping that it's going to come out. That rises up really tall, and you've got the lid on it. You cut the lid away. and fill it with macaroni. So these gorgeous things, and you certainly wouldn't want to throw away a beautiful vol au vent. But yeah, the days of the coffin, as it was once called, when you chipped away the outer part, it was basically a hollow brick, and yeah, those days had passed. So going down a rabbit hole about that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm definitely. I don't think I've ever had a macaroni pie, but after reading your book, I definitely want to try a macaroni pie because I've seen recipes for them. I don't know. I guess carb on carb. I'm like, that seems a bit heavy, but yeah. I think that the important thing to know, anyone who's listening to this podcast probably realizes this, but you wouldn't have had necessarily a whole pie to yourself. You would have had it would have been on a table with other dishes.
Not the small, delicate, ploumans.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So how does mac and cheese continue to evolve into the 19th century?
So we're moving from the 18th century, and we begin to see a net distinction between, you got that savory and sweet. They're going their separate ways. And then savory macaroni was increasingly being put into these pies, often in the fricassee form. So you've got a liaison with a creamy, and sometimes the lemon with it as well. We're getting creamier and creamier, sometimes adding chicken to it, or some kind of fowl. Eggs are being put into it. And also the very simple, if you want to call it a pie form, of having a gratinée topping. And all of this is reflecting French influence, but of course the English also have the very long tradition of pie making, and coaxing macaroni in between those pastry shells made it particularly appealing. So you had the irresistible double carbohydrate punch, as it is. And this was in both raised pies and homey single pies. Now I say that, the French influence, but we do have our first macaroni pie in 1570, Bartolomeo Scappi. I want to give my attention to the Italians as well. Over the course of time, as I said, cheese is becoming more flexible rather than relying on the imported cheeses. You've got more local cheeses, and it's not a cheap substitute. Something interesting that's going on, though, with that is the choice of cheeses and that orange hue. Cheeses that naturally had an orange hue, but that had since the 18th century had coloring added to it. So you're changing not only the taste and texture profile, but also the color. And so American macaroni and cheese is famously often orange. If I can mention, one of my favorite examples in this, again, all about movement, is Mrs. Fraser's Scottish macaroni pie, 1795. Macaroni pie, then interesting, remains part of Scotland's culinary canon. Okay. It is today. And hers is the earliest recipe that I have found that has cayenne pepper as one of the added ingredients. So this is a seemingly small detail, but is attached to a much larger story, because it's very much about a reflection of the triangular trade that's going on between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, in this particular case, in the Caribbean. And this is going to then move also into the southern foodways of the southern United States. So while sugar and rum and molasses were moving eastward, they're producing so much sugar and sugar products that a large amount of food had to be imported. Now, this was also to maintain that colonial FOMO of just keeping up with what was in fashion and serving what was in fashion. And this included macaroni and cheese. So the interesting part about this is then what we see today is that macaroni pie, a thing called macaroni pie, is the national dish of Barbados.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It doesn't have a crust on it. It is baked in such a way that the objective is for it to then cool down and be sliced and servable in blocks. It's something that you can take to the beach. You can take it to picnics. It's not an awful dried thing, but that also, when it comes out of the oven, it's got a creaminess to it. But the creaminess is part of what makes it adhere into those blocks, right? And it's also wonderfully spicy with onions, sometimes a little bit of garlic, sometimes a bit of thyme, flexible on that. But they use now an imported cheese from New Zealand. New Zealand sharp cheddar. That orange cheese is very much important. Also, the addition of ketchup. You know, in Trinidad, we don't add ketchup. So, but it's a very important dish throughout the Caribbean. Less so in Cuba, however.
So I'm guessing in the sort of Victorian era, mac and cheese still exists. You've talked about Mrs. Fraser, obviously that's pre-Victorian era, but people like Eliza Acton have recipes for mac and cheese. It's still being served at some quite classy events, you know, at dinner parties. When do we start seeing it, though, move to perhaps being more mainstream and served across all sort of levels of society?
Yeah, at the same period of time. So when you're talking about Elizabeth Acton, and then we also have Mrs. Beeton, that's when Alexis Soyer, or Alexis Sawyer, however one wants to pronounce that, that's when we have a discussion about reform coming in. And also, now a lot of things are brewing at the same time here, with social reform, improvements in industrialization, which is going to bring more macaroni, also the imported macaroni, change in the corn laws, which allows for the importation of other foodstuffs. The concept of gluten. Now, we're all about gluten-free these days, but gluten was the miracle food at the time. That's how we like to do it. We like to create these sort of taboo foods and then the miracle foods. Gluten was a miracle substance, and the food where it was most present was macaroni. Macaroni became then, because of gluten, it was referred to as a flesh-forming food. When you're talking about reform and getting more protein to the working classes, macaroni and cheese is going to be your dish. You've got cheese there. The cheese is adaptable. When you cook that macaroni to make it quadruple in size, you're going to be able to feed a family of 6 with very little money. And so all of that's coming together and going on at the same time. And an awareness in cookbooks, what Mrs. Beeton is saying, gets even rewritten in Australia, in Edward Abbott's first Australian cookbook, where he's praising gluten and saying that this is a dish that needs to be broadcast more on the working class table. Charles Dickens as well was in on it, saying that this is a simple dish and certainly adjustable to anyone's palate. So always acquiring new meaning. You go from the elite to this is suddenly flesh forming. It's good for the elderly. It's good for children. It then, you know, if we were to go on and on, it then moves into World War I and becoming a symbol of that and how we're going to save that soft wheat for the Allies by eating more macaroni. And also, you know, it's on the ration card in the United States in the 1940s. And then, of course, we get Kraft and bringing that into people's hearts and homes and always changing the meaning, the development of comfort food and the idea of comfort. So we start off with something on the papal table and end up with mac and cheese. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the part of the podcast where I ask you what you're going to bring to our season's virtual potluck supper. Technically, we're not in a season. This is a bonus episode, but I still want you to bring me something to eat because that's the way I roll. So what dish will you bring to the season's virtual potluck supper?
If I'm thinking of this season and I'm thinking of something that's going to be delightful and, the kind of thing about, oh, how do you make this kind of dish? I would bring my recipe for marinated eggplant.
Oh, okay. Yeah, nice.
So marinated eggplant, if you got a slice, you slice that eggplant. You cook it on what's called a piastra, which is a cast iron pan that has lines on it. I don't know if it's something. Okay, good. And so that you're getting those lines as you cook the lengthwise. Well, I make them lengthwise. You could also make them round. The slices. You've got your dressing on the side, which is about 250 milliliters. I'm talking about two eggplants here for a party. So 250 milliliters of olive oil, about 3 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, the zest of a lemon, finely minced basil. I always like a little bit of pepper on everything. You don't need to use the pepper though. Smashed minced garlic. Mix all of that together. A little bit of smoked paprika. That's to just give it that extra kind of thing so it seems like it's been cooked on the grill. You can actually cook this on the grill, but that's much more of a pain. But you can get that effect by putting in the smoked paprika. So take them off there, put a little salt, put a little dressing on, keep making your slices. They're going to be warm and losing a little bit of liquid. And then kind of toss it around. Oh, I forgot parsley. I also put minced parsley in. Kind of toss it around. It's got to sit for a day and it will last even up to a week, even a little bit more. Depending on how much olive oil you put in. It can be swimming in olive oil. We love that. And goes good with everything. It becomes a side dish for everything and improves with flavor as time goes on. So there you go.
Sounds like absolutely my sort of thing.
There's my dish.
I love, well, we call them aubergines over here, but I love
That's right.
eggplant. So there are lots of recipes in your book. I know it's not a recipe book, it's a history book. Is there a standout macaroni cheese recipe where you go, actually, now I've discovered this, I'm never going back to how I used to make it prior to doing my research?
God, I've got to, okay.
I know it's like picking your favorite kid. I know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, kids a kid. Let me, if you're up for a real big challenge, the Menon vol au vent, it's incredible. The macaroni is cooked in beef broth, with a little bit of rose water to it as well.
Interesting.
But some of these also have rose water. That's a Middle Ages thing but really, really exquisite. And you don't have to make the macaroni yourself. But you do have to make that big vol au vent.
And
it's flaky pastry. It's flaky pastry. And you make a base and then the ring on top, and a lid. So they all need to, I'm very precise about the measurements of each one. And it grows up into this just gorgeous thing. So then you've got to fish the dough out that gets doughy in the middle. If you like to cook to impress, that's an impressive dish. Tasty wise, I think the Caribbean dish is really excellent. The Barbados, Bajan macaroni pie. So Ottolenghi and Helen Go also contributed a macaroni dish to the book because they had written their book called Comfort together, which was published recently. And for whatever reason, they've decided to not use this recipe, and they allowed me to have their macaroni recipe. It's got so many steps in the classic Ottolenghi kind of style with so many ingredients, which when I first saw it, it's like, oh my God, really? How is this going to? And it comes together so nicely. So that's another recipe that I'd recommend.
What's next on the horizon for you?
There's also a cookbook that I've been thinking of, and frankly, any literary agents who are listening, if you want to contact me, I've got a few ideas brewing that I just am not ready to talk about. But I am working on my dissertation for PhD, so I'm looking at under a year right now at this point. Yeah, also because I've got this new book that is kind of pulling at me, and
Anyway, thank you so much for your time today, Karima. It's been fascinating. We'll put links to your social media and obviously the book, which everyone should go forth and buy because it's a fabulous book to read. And I promise you, I'm not just saying this. It is a really, I literally couldn't put it down. So,
thank you so much.
It is one of those books, you and I both have to read some pretty dry stuff for our work. And it's definitely not one of those. So, okay. Go away and buy it, folks, and cook some of the recipes, which is exactly what I'm planning to do. And so I can continue my love affair with mac and cheese. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You can find links to Karima's website, social media, and books, including the epic history of mac and cheese, in the show notes. And if there are any publishers out there listening to this podcast, do be sure to commission Karima to write that pasta book, because that's certainly one I would like to read. I don't know about you, but I'm craving some mac and cheese right now after my chat with Karima. So I'm off to gorge myself on a double carb fest macaroni pie. I'll be back soon though with another bonus episode to tide you over until the new season begins in 2027. In the meantime, do check out my other podcast, A is for Apple, the culinary encyclopedia that explores food history and culture a letter at a time, which I host with fellow food historians Dr. Neil Buttery and Dr. Alessandra Pino. I'll be back soon. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you really loved it, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, as it really will help other listeners discover Comfortably Hungry. Don't forget to pop along to sambilton.com, where you'll find details on my books, which include my latest publication, Much Ado About Cooking, written in collaboration with Shakespeare's Globe. This new cookbook features recipes inspired by the food in the Bard plays and was huge fun to write, so I think it will be right up your street. You may also want to subscribe to the Comfortably Hungry Substack, which includes more detailed notes from the show. You can subscribe for free, but if you become a paid subscriber for £3.50 a month, you'll also get recipes inspired by the topics covered in the show and access to extra content. Alternatively, you can leave me a one-off tip via Ko-fi to show your appreciation. Just click on the relevant link in the show notes. Your support will help fund the research required to produce Comfortably Hungry. It also means that I can avoid including those pesky ads that may interfere with your enjoyment of the podcast. If you have any questions relating to this season's theme, you can leave a comment in the chat section of the Comfortably Hungry Substack page or tag me on social media. Remember, you can find me on Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. I'll be plunging back into the liquid world of food and drink history soon, but until then, take care. Comfortably Hungry is research produced and presented by food historian Sam Bilton, with sound mixing and production by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Additional sound effects and music are provided by Zapsplat and Pom5.